Shot. Yeah.
Hello,
Where am I
Cash.
looking? At you?
You're looking right here.
Cool.
Hello, Cash Filburn. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Got some coffee in me.
What is your stage name?
My stage name is The Money Store.
This is harder than I thought, being on the spot.
What was it like recording these songs?
What's that? What's wrong? What happened?
It was difficult. It was stressful. Because I'm not a very tech savvy person, and me, tracking all the drums myself and dealing with interfaces and laptops and microphones and, on top of that, having to play the material, which is pretty difficult. It's kind of stressful, but, recording is that kind of thing for me that once it's done, it's like it was worth all of the effort, as long as the final product is there, it's like the ends justify the means, so.
What was it like recording these songs?
Awesome.
Is that right?
Nope.
No.
Ah! One more.
That was close.
That was pretty close.
Dude, I think that was it.
Is that it?
Cool. Keep it.
Let's
Let's
listen.
listen.
That's it.
Don't even listen to it.
Don't even listen
Don't
to it.
even listen
Just
to it.
right.
Recording these songs were a lot of fun because it allowed us to really sort of crystallize what we've been working on and make it into something that we could really just show people easily, because you could show people in a live performance, but it's a lot easier just to be like, hey, here's a song, and then while you're driving in the car, sing.
Hashtag 3-foot-long net gang.
Probably no kneecaps, because I feel like I'd be more functional as a human being with no kneecaps than a 3-foot-long neck.
Definitely no kneecaps.
I know I have the contrarian opinion here, but I, as a drummer, do not like the idea of not having is it no knees or no kneecaps?
No kneecaps.
Does that mean my leg is just going to be straight?
Pencils.
My leg cannot bend.
No.
Pencil leg.
Okay, I want to clarify. So if the leg cannot bend,
Like one long bone.
if the leg cannot bend, I am 3-foot-long neck. Like those dudes on Camino in Star Wars, they can live like that, so can I. It's okay. I can deal with the 3-foot-long neck. I can't deal with my legs not working, bro.
I don't want to be a snake person.
You're wrong.
And at least, if you have, no kneecaps, you can park in the handicap zone.
Ready?
Does this sound right?
Just whack it down.
Typically, one of us, usually Justin, writes a couple notes, writes a good ditty, and he brings it to us, and we each come up with parts that go with it. Just try to make it as manic as possible.
The album was written mostly me and Justin in a room together, just drums and guitar. Sometimes I'll write a song on drums, and guitar and bass will be written after the fact, or sometimes guitar will be written by itself, and we'll add drums and bass later. Sometimes it'll be written in MIDI form, so like a Nintendo sound, it'll be written like that, and then we'll program drums and then learn the parts.
I try not to think of any other musical inspirations when I write. Essentially, it's me just sitting there waiting to get some inspiration from God. At times, I can be walking around and just get something stuck in my head that is totally, fabricated, and then I have to learn it on guitar to get it out of my head. Yeah, I try not to pull any inspiration from any other music when I do it. I don't want to sound like another band. and then someone's like, "Oh, hey, you sound like this band," and I'm just like, "Okay, I guess."
I draw inspiration from other art, anime, other musicians, movies, TV shows, anything that, you know, there's that feeling, you know, like you experience someone else's creation and you experience like humanity. I know that sounds kind of pretentious, but like I really mean it in the sense of like I feel human when I'm watching that 70s show. I feel human when I'm watching The Office. I feel human when I'm watching Neon Genesis Evangelion. I feel human when I'm watching Akira.
Other musicians, for sure. You know, I've got a handful of bassists that I use as my main inspiration, and I try to draw from their ideas and their music and incorporate it in some way in my own. But then also musicians who don't play the same instrument as me can definitely get an idea of different feel and rhythm type things from other instruments.
When I write music, I tend to write in a vacuum. Unlike Cash and Nathan, I don't really like to listen to music very often. I still listen to music. Sometimes it just ends up being like video game soundtracks, or when other people have it in the car or something. But a lot of times I don't really write music with any real band in mind, and so I'll just go at it, and I'll sit down with my guitar, and I'll just sort of, whatever comes to me, or while I'm walking around doing chores, I'll just have something pop in my head, and then I'll just sort of replay it like a song that gets stuck in your head. And because the song's stuck in my head, I found the only way to really get a song unstuck from my head is to learn it, and so I end up learning it on guitar, and then I fiddle with it more, and then it becomes a thing.
The most difficult part.
2,000 years later.
All of the work that's gone into making the art happen. So like recording, like album art, like getting it mixed and mastered, like doing the music videos, like all the stuff that is necessary to like craft the vision, but all the stuff that's just like you don't always want to do it, but you know that at the end of the day it's gonna make everything come together and give it that, like I said, larger than life feel.
So the most difficult part of this entire time that we've been working on this project has probably been motivationally sticking to it. You know, it's really easy to just sort of make a thing and be like, oh yeah, you know, it's good.
Well, it's kind of why,
you know, show it to your friends.
It's kind of why it took so long.
Yeah, exactly. And so you want it to be done right, you know, and so you don't want to, if you really spend this much time in it, you get more invested in it, right? And so it's like, oh, well, if we did this good, we can't have bad art, and so we pay a little more on art. It's like, okay, if we paid all this money on art and now we're paying, you know, and we spent all this time on it, well, then we need to make sure we have good recordings. And then so a lot of our recordings were all done by stems sent off to a producer, so that way we can sit there and painstakingly make sure that we get every single take exactly right. We don't be like, oh, well, it's just gonna have to be good enough because we can only have this much time in the studio. It's like, no, if it's not good enough, we spend another day doing it, and then you just kill all your free time. So the most difficult part of the journey has been not losing heart.
Well, the most difficult part for me was right at the beginning, when Cash had come to me and said, hey, come up with the bass part to this song that Justin and I have written. I'd never heard it before. I didn't even know what tuning it was in. I didn't know how it sounded. I didn't know what they were going for. I didn't know anything about it, just that I was supposed to write a bass part. So I wrote the world's worst bass part, and Cash hated every part of it, but we stuck with it, and we got something we liked.
It's good now.
Colavelle first got its roots in long drives to get burritos with me and Cash. We would drive out in the middle of Phoenix because there's this place called Heriberto's, and it had the best burritos in town. And so we would drive all the way out there, and we would talk about like fantasy music projects, of things we would want to do if we had our own music project together. And we haven't had a music project together in years at that point.
A little over 2 years ago, I got to a point where I had been so busy in regards to doing musical things. I was in a band called Gold Season, and I was also still in Rio Wiley at this point. I eventually quit both projects basically. Through touring and like all the practicing I was doing, I eventually just became very burned out and quit everything. Decided I wanted to go to school for psychology. For about 2 weeks, I was kind of in this like super depressed state. In about December, like 2 years ago, and didn't touch my drums. Yeah, I eventually was just, I like didn't sign up for classes, and then I was just like, you know what? Let's give this music thing one more shot, because it was all I had really cared about or worked on until that point for like 7.5 years of my life. What would happen if I just sat down and just honestly created something? Because up to this point, I had kind of, been playing music that I had viewed as like, well, this is popular to an extent, niche popularity, generic popularity, so like maybe that will lead to something. And I had kind of been thinking about it very business-mindedly, very business-like, and I was like, what if I just made a thing that I wanted to make without any other motivations?
We would always talk about like, oh, if we were gonna do it, then we would use floodlights and we would have this great aesthetic, and then there'd be other things like, oh, like we should really go all out and do like animated album art or whatever. We would just come up with all these ideas, and then they would never do it. And when Cash went through the crisis of identity, of what he wanted to do in the future with music, he came to me and he's just like, hey, all those things we talked about, we need to do them, or I'm just gonna quit music.
Yeah, I hit up Justin and I was like, hey, let's actually write something and actually finish it this time.
That was a level of stress, but like responsibilities. Like he came to me, also honored, because he came to me as the one he wanted to give his last hurrah of music to, like, is this worth doing? And he thought that I was the one he decided to whether or not he was going to make that decision. And I'm glad that he continued doing it, because he's a phenomenal drummer and I don't deserve him.
And so that's when we met up in my garage and we wrote Genesis Sophia over the course of like months, because that song was like 8 minutes long, and it was hot. I mean, even in the winter in Arizona, if you're in a garage, it can still get kind of warm. So
from there, we just locked ourselves in a garage. Basically, we would meet up every day or every other day, sometimes for months, and we would just non-stop write. We would spend all of our time doing it. I had various musical ideas that I wanted to try to implement, and they're sort of fractured. It would eventually become Genesis Sophia. When I would bring it to Cash, I'd bring these ideas. I'm like, hey, this is what I got as a general part, and he'd be like, okay, cool, and he'd come up with some drums to it. There would be times where we would make it, and then we would leave, and then we'd come back, and it's just like, oh no, this is just, what was it that I played here? And it's like, well, if we don't remember, it wasn't good enough to keep. And so that's what we did. And eventually, we started adding more components to our music. So eventually I got 2 amps, and I got an ABY switch to start playing on 2 amps. And we liked that. We liked it. Thought it sounded much more like a music group. It wasn't sort of like just like a project that we were messing around with. When we were doing the 2 amp setup, it sounded much better, but we felt like it lacked low end. It just didn't have enough, thick beefiness to it. And, didn't make, you didn't feel it in your chest really. And so I added another ABY switch, and it allowed me to plug in, go to a bass amp. I pitch shifted it using a pedal, and that made it sound, really, and it really was great.
we kind of like started picking up steam creatively, and we found Nathan.
We played around with the idea for about a year, maybe a year and a half, to add a bassist, add a third person, but we knew that it had to be someone who would be able to put up with us, and also that we could just, enjoy the presence of and actually be like an actual third person. We didn't want it to just be 2 people with like some guy that we just pay, because that's really lame. We wanted it to actually be like a third member. Long story short, we eventually got Nathan in the band, and he came in, and he's just a monster. He comes in and he plays parts on the bass, and it's like, oh yeah, and I sit there and try to do, like, how do you move your right hand fingers that quick? And that eventually blossomed into what we got right now. And after these 3 songs, after he came back and wrote bass parts, which just absolutely, brought to life parts of songs that I didn't really, just sort of was like, oh yeah, this is a thing we do here. And then he comes in, he throws it in, and then suddenly it's like, oh my gosh.
The thing that's so cool about this project to me is the start of it was my lowest point, as one of my lowest points as a person. And so it kind of spawned out of darkness, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is it came to be out of just passion. It wasn't like we were set out to do anything other than make music for ourselves. And I think that's the right way to do it.
Oh man, I already know all of them.
Piano. So if I learned piano, I could buy a MIDI keyboard and I could literally compose entire scores all by myself, and I could like ghostwrite. I could just compose stuff for myself. I could contribute more to this band if I knew how to play piano, because I could write full songs for the band rather than just write songs on drums.
If I could learn any instrument, I would definitely learn piano. Like, I could learn, but my difficulty is that my whole life of playing music, I've played flute, I've played trumpet, and guitar and bass and all that. And so my hands have always been synced in doing a thing. And the idea of doing different things at the same time, just way too much multitasking for me. And so whenever I've had to learn like tapping parts that require both hands, essentially, I mean, I get a taste of what I guess it would be like to play piano, but really what it comes down to, just, I think of it as one like long thing playing together, while piano tends to think of it as like 2 completely independent things almost doing something on autopilot while you're doing something. I don't even know, because I don't play piano, but that's the best way I can think of it, and it's too much for me. The name comes from the Hebrew words for all is vapor, from the second verse of the first chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament. The book of Ecclesiastes essentially is a long, almost a polemic about existence. It talks about just how things are just exhaustive, how we go through life and pretty much everything we do fades away in the end. Even the largest kingdoms, like Rome or Babylon, they all end up falling apart. Even if they exist hundreds of years or thousands of years, they just evaporate. And there's probably multiple cultures we will never hear about because they've just been gone with the wind. And so that's what it's about. And there's this phrase repeated throughout the book where it says, this too is a chasing after the wind. When you're pursuing a thing, more, it's going to be vapor. It's just you're chasing after wind itself, and when you try to grab it, it's intrinsically going to slip through your fingers. And so, the real question is, well, then what isn't vapor? What is the rock?
Attention to detail.
I'd say probably my strength as a musician would probably just be my creativity.
I learn stuff very quick.
Taking the time to make sure that it's done the way that I believe it should be.
If I'm not playing it well, I'll fix it. Like, I'm not okay with it just being kind of bad.
I memorize it decently quick depending on the difficulty.
Determination, motivation, trying hard.
I can read sheet music really well. I've always been a good sight reader. So learning music has never been an issue. Kol Havel is a creative outlet that I've never been exposed to before.
Kol Havel, to me, it's the one place I can go in my life that I don't consider it work. It's where I go to just art.
What's being asked? Is it being asked the name of the band? Is it being asked the meaning behind the name? Or is it being asked the music project itself? And I think intrinsically all of them are tied together to a point, because really when it comes down to it, even if I became the biggest musician ever, even if I was bigger than the Beatles, Metallica, and every other large band combined, if I was the biggest of the biggest, there was probably a biggest of the biggest 1,000, 2,000 years ago. Intrinsically what we're doing.
Jesus.
Yeah. Now you're interrupting. Intrinsically, almost everything we do is just, become vapor. And so I think the point is, get people thinking now. Because my view is, what is the things that aren't vapor? Well, I think people are one of those things.
Bye. Have a beautiful time.